Hi there, thanks for clicking this video. I'm Brent, and I'm the content creator and webmaster for New Do Review, the YouTube channel as well as the blog. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the original reading list that I guess introduced me into reading as maybe a hobby, but as a way to continue lifelong learning. And it's been a wonderful experience since my experience with this original reading list. It's just a handful of books, but I feel that these few books really put me on a track to try and understand the world and try to look at things that I wouldn't have been familiar with or wouldn't have really otherwise known, based on my original interests. If you've seen other videos or read articles, you know that I have a music background, and that's kind of where my primary interest is. So anything beyond music is still fairly new to me. So I guess the main reason why this original book list is so important to me is that it put me outside of my comfort zone for a little while and started to make me think about the world around me. A lot of these books are business centered. There's some economics in there too, and so that was definitely outside of my comfort zone when I originally read these books. That would be, I guess, the main reason why I'm still thinking about what's in these books, and putting together the reading list that I have so far has made me a little anxious to talk about these books. So, but before we get into that, we'll kind of get into the format of this, kind of like a table of contents. A lot of the New Do Review videos, I feel like I'm just going to start it off that way so that you know what you're getting into, because I don't want you to click on this and expect something that you don't want. So this is going to be just one long take. There's going to be no edits, nothing fancy like that. Just me and the camera and the water bottle too. This actually, oddly enough, this water bottle has gotten me through. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the videos, because you get thirsty when you talk. Talking is hard, and I guess I'll make my regular speech about still not being good in front of the camera and not knowing what to look at. And I've got this little viewer thing on the left side, I guess, of the camera, so sometimes I look at that and I don't look at the camera. I don't know. I say and ah and so, and I pause weirdly. This is just a learning experience, I guess. But I want you to see that as well. That's the kind of funny thing, is that I'm okay with watching me. I guess sort of stumble my way into this, because I think there's a beauty to that. There's a subtle beauty to watching somebody, I guess, fail their way to the top or something, because I'm also interested in that too. I'm making content that I would want to watch myself, and so, I noticed, with the grand scope of what's on YouTube and what type of content exists in video form, is it's all very pristine and it's perfect. It's very well done. People are very talented, but that's not I guess a reason to do this. But for me, it's to capture these subtle moments of artistic splendor, I guess. Because you can't capture certain things when it's going to get edited. You're sort of scripting it out. And so with something like this, I want to just sit here with you and the camera and just go and see what happens. Because sometimes there's going to be some, I'll say some interesting things, or I'll be thinking about what I said originally, and I'll come up with something. And I mean, who knows? A lot of this I'm doing really for posterity in a way too, for the future. another thing to recognize as a new content creator like myself is that you don't get exposure right away. That's just not a reality. And so that's a nice little, maybe a lesson to start with if you're watching this and you're a content creator and you're new. It takes time. So the things I'm doing them for future people, for a few years down the road. I hope that these videos can stay up on YouTube and available for people to watch for many years. I hope, at least, unless things change in the future. But we're here now, and then this is how it goes. So that's kind of the format. So if my awkwardness makes you laugh, kind of like how you'd watch a B or a D. I guess this is more like a D movie, like a direct to DVD or VHS kind of thing. But there's entertainment in that. I like watching B movies because it's fun to watch stuff that's so bad it's good, if you know what I mean. So yeah, there we have it. That's kind of the scope of the format. So keep watching. We're gonna get into some really cool books. I definitely I promise you that. So let's talk about the reading list again. I already sort of covered already the power of the reading list, at least for me, or at least why it's important to me, is it got me into reading more, I guess, as a serious hobby. So I guess the real story comes from a Christmas party. If you've read the article, the 2019 reading list, I may have mentioned that in there, but just to kind of catch you up, one Christmas, I think it was 2013 or so, or in between 2010 and 2013, somewhere around that time. I was just at a Christmas party with family friends, and as an adult, you get to fraternize with the other adults. Basically, you get to party with them. That's a privilege of growing up and knowing family friends for a period of time. And so I was talking with one of the family friends, and I don't know how we got onto the subject, but we ended up I guess discussing hobbies, and I think I asked what's your main hobby? What do you do in your spare time? And he basically just says I read a lot. I read books. I use my Amazon Prime membership like no one's business. I don't mean this to be like an Amazon shoehorn promo, but I mean that's literally what he said. And then I think his wife, who's right next to him, she kind of looks over and goes, "Yeah, we spend a lot of money on Amazon books. It's kind of what we do. Reading is a big hobby." And so that kind of it made me think a little bit, because at that time I wasn't reading very regularly. I was in university. I was just reading sort of the required amount what you would need to read, but I never really considered choosing certain books to learn things or develop an interest like that to be anything worth investing a lot of time into, like the family friend I'm referring to. Reading as a hobby, I read a lot as a statement. That's an interesting statement to make. I read books, and so it's stuck with me for that long, basically, and it sort of mutated into like a profound statement, and at least in my mind, is I read a lot. That's kind of cool. I wonder now, looking back, what his bookshelf looks like. I guess that would be something pretty cool to experience. And I guess that's why I showed you my bookshelf on that first video, is, because there's a physical experience, looking at books and the colors and the shapes of books, all those, I find it interesting. I don't know, maybe sound nerdy or something, but, those are things I think about, I guess. So, yeah. So where were we going with that? I read a lot. That's a cool statement, and as we were talking about reading, he offered a reading list to me, and because I think I asked, like, well, how do you find your books? Like, where do you have, does someone tell you what to read, or do you have an intuition? I think he said something about he had a group of friends that shared book lists and stuff. So he offered a book list to me, and I remember he sent me an email a few days later, just with it was these books here on the floor. I'll show them. We'll get to that in a second. But it was just a list of books. And just basically said, enjoy. There it is. That's the new reading list that I guess was being shared around, and so I took that list very seriously, and I went and ordered all the books basically on Amazon, I think, or I was able to find a few in my local bookstore, and that was kind of cool. And I just read them. It was neat because I felt really inspired to read those books. So there was a different energy behind reading those books on the list. It was almost like I was going to accomplish something if I finished the list. So there was this added weight to the experience, which was it was so cool. When I think back, I was like, all right, cool. I read that one, and what's next? And I kept going and going. And eventually, what happened is I finished the list, and it sort of had that feeling of running through a forest to just your tunnel vision, then you're on the other end of it. You're outside the forest, and you're like, where am I? Like, where there's an anxiousness about it because you've just been in the zone for so long. And at that point, I started developing a more personalized list for myself, I guess you could say. I started to piggyback off books. You could look at the reference list on the back of certain books. Certain authors will list like a bibliography, things like that, and you can use that to piggyback into new books and things, or you can start to build your own list that way. And that's kind of what I did for the rest of the year. Is I started to just branch out and read things that were outside of my comfort zone. But because these books put me into a certain level of comfort for these topics, I was able to read other books within those topics a little bit easier than I would have otherwise have been if I had not tried to read these books. So I'm very thankful for that original experience, that sort of situation of curiosity and wanting to get to know somebody. And you talk about something as hey, what's your hobby? And then it just kind of goes from there. So those are those are valuable experiences, I feel. And considering the digital world we live in, where there's a lot of YouTube stuff that's sort of tip giving education, it can put less emphasis on that real one-to-one personal experience of sharing your hobby with somebody, because it can be I don't know, some people may have an opinion about that. They may not want to for whatever reason. I don't know, but it makes me think about that as an experience. That could just be me sort of in an isolation situation where I'm just thinking back and I'm sort of projecting into the future, with all this digital stuff. But yeah, it's so valuable to talk about your hobbies to other people. And if I hadn't have asked, I would have never gotten these books, and I would have never started reading as a serious hobby, I guess you could say, or maybe a habit now. It's I find I try to read every day as much as I can, and try to read new books. So yeah, I'm very thankful of that. So I won't tell you who this person is. I want to keep them anonymous, I guess. But thank you. It was such a valuable a moment to experience. So let's get on to the books. Let's stop getting all sappy, because these books are really good. Like I said, they're business centric. It talks about the businesses in North America, I guess you could say. A lot of the figures in these books are North American too, so that's something to note. take that for whatever it means. But a lot of these that's where a lot of this information is coming from. It's North American basically. But I'm really only mentioning that because we're in a global world. The world is so connected. So if someone's watching this from, I don't know, the UK or Germany or Russia, Australia, wherever, right? I think it's worth noting that where these books come from as a source, because that's valuable to know. At least that's something that I take note of. Who's the author? Where's this story being told from? Is this knowledge regional? Is it coming from a certain place? Anyways, those are the things that I think about. So let's talk about the first three books. So I don't know if maybe you can see this, but there you go. So that's what they look like. Kind of like, I always have a thing about colors and the color books. So the first book we'll talk about is called The Little Ice Age: How Climate Made History, 1300 to 1850 by Brian Fagan. There we go, this. So before we talk about the books, I want to note something real quick, because I guess this more aligns with the format, so you kind of know how we're going to talk about the books. I'm not going to go into into detail about these books because I haven't read them for about, I guess, 7 years now, maybe. I'm going to talk about things surrounding the book, and I'll open the book and try to find notable things, and because I want to show you, I want to almost relive the moment where if you were to meet me in person and I said, hey, I got a book list for you and I have the books here, I kind of want to show you how it would be like if I was to just off the cuff start talking about these books to you in real time, because I think that's kind of neat. Going back to the talk of like a one-to-one experience, I want to create that for you and try and give you value that way. So I want to talk about these books as if you were here in this exact moment and you were curious. So because in real life you don't get to prepare for a lot of things. You just have to stumble into situations, right? When I look back at asking the hobby question, it's not like he was prepared to talk about reading your books. So there's an interesting element that I want to capture on film with you. So I'm not going to talk too much about what the books are, because another reason too is I want you to read these and experience them for yourselves. I don't really want to reveal too much of the books, but I do want to create sort of an overarching dialogue, because there are some themes in these books that connect together, which I guess why the reading list was probably put together in the way it was. So there's that to consider too. So I definitely don't want to ruin things for you, but I do want to get through these books also in a unique, experiential way, I guess. Here, I'm just going to have some water. And I guess before we talk about the books, you already know the first book, I revealed it, but I'll give the disclaimer about Amazon, because Amazon is really kind of a part of this story. That's where all these books came from. That's where the avid readers that I guess I'm referring to get a lot of their books, because it's an easy way to get your literature and stuff. So all these books will be in the description below. They're my Amazon links. It's part of the Associates program, so that's kind of the disclaimer. I still don't know completely what the disclaimer should be, because this is all sort of affiliated marketing territory. You get commission for people who buy through your Amazon links. So I'm really doing this as more of an informational way, so that you can get, you can at least see the books. You don't have to buy them if you don't want to. You can always get them in the store, but I want to make it easy for you to get the books. So just know that. So I guess that's all I want to say, and then I guess as a joke originally I had the water bottle excuse me, and there is a affiliate link in the camera. But you can't see the camera. I've only got one camera, so at least you get to see the type of camera I use. It's okay. It's a decent camera. There's better cameras out there. I think this camera is probably under a few $100s, I think. I don't want to quote prices because they change all the time, but yeah, at least you get to see. It's decent. The microphone is very good. It's right on the front, and it captures what it needs to. So yeah, I feel like I'm sort of putting off the books, and you're probably getting a little anxious and thinking, well, let's talk about the books. Let's talk about the books. So let's do it. But yeah, everything will be in the description. I'll have some more links for you as a resource. So the little essay, How Climate Made History. I think you should start with this book. Unfortunately, I read this book last on the list because it was the hardest to find when I was trying to acquire these books. But I think you should, if you're able to get all these books and you're fortunate enough to do that, start with this one because what's interesting is that climate has patterns. This book sort of reveals a lot of the patterns in the overall climate of the world, and it reveals some interesting situations where climate very easily can influence business models and governments and how people operate and move around. Climate change is a big topic right now, and in this book, it sort of, I guess, it makes reference to migrations of people due to climate change. If a certain place is inhospitable, you can't live there. So the whole group, like the whole civilization, basically has to relocate to other parts of the world where the climate is different. And so that's very interesting, and it uses historic data. I guess this is more of a I'm not sure what to classify as, like a humanities more of a history book, you could say, but it's written in a nice way that has a very clean narrative, so it's not difficult to read. It's very easy, and it's almost like a story, I guess you could say. So the narrative is quite clean, like I said, like it's very very easy to go through, and so it reveals these sorts of patterns where, if you really look back at the grand, scope of human history, sometimes things that may seem abnormal may not be that abnormal compared to the grand scope of history. But that isn't to say what's happening now in climate change isn't serious. It is very serious. But a book like this can reveal for you that there's overarching patterns that have happened throughout history that are very interesting to know about. This book actually refers to a period of time where the climate was very hot and then very cold. The 1300s, it basically starts in the 1300s, like the book says. And so this is very neat because what you find in the other books is you're dealing with sort of historic patterns that seem to just repeat. History always repeats itself. I've said that in a few videos, and I think it's an interesting concept to keep exploring, especially within books, because things just they happen more than once, but they happen in different ways. It's not like something that's going to literally happen over and over, but things in the world, especially business related and maybe even in politics, I guess you could say, or climate. This is talking about climate. It's saying that there are certain patterns in the large cycles that are embedded in the earth. Really, like this earth is a big biological functioning thing, like a gestalt thing, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's the right word. I think I could get in trouble for that, but no, I think gestalt is maybe a good word because it's made up of a bunch of things that make the earth. So it's this living thing that goes through changes, and it has large cycles, and so this reveals a little bit of that, and it sort of puts you on a path of thinking in cycles, long-term cycles. And that's where we get into basically the next series of books. Both of these books, Fortune's Formula, The Untold Story of the Scientific Betting System That Beat the Casinos and Wall Street. That's quite the one. William Poundstone, that's this one. And the next one is An Empire of Wealth, The Epic History of American Economic Power by John Steele Gordon. So these two books, I think they're... when I read them, they kind of touched on similar topics, so I feel that you should read them one after another. I don't know which one first. I don't think it makes too much of a difference, but I would go that way. But let's do this one, the green book. I like green. So this is a very interesting book because, as we said, the long-term cycles. This kind of gets into the I guess the evolution of technology, maybe, or it tells an interesting story of how a small group of people really just wanted to figure out the world in a very specific way when it comes to risk taking and information. Because this book covers a lot of topics like Las Vegas, buying stocks. It explains how the stock market works in a little way. It talks about man versus machine, why money managers are no good. Claude Shannon, he's one of the main figures in this book as a character that represents how information changes. I don't know. I would be best to look up Claude Shannon again to know, but he died. His character in this book at least represents sort of how information theory comes about and how big of a role how information matters in this book. And so that's a very interesting narrative because he's one of the first people you get introduced to in this book, and then you've got things like the gambler's ruin, randomness, disorder, uncertainty. So there's a lot of cool things in there. I can't remember if it talks about quantum mechanics in any way, because there's certain uncertainty things that are part of that, but I don't know quantum mechanics too well. I shouldn't get myself in trouble that way. But so just back to Claude Shannon. So that's an example of a historic figure who's had significant accomplishments, plays a thematic role throughout this entire book, and you get to other parts. By the end of the book, you're talking about Shannon's demons. So it kind of brings him back into the text to talk about unfinished business. There is pinball machines. All gamblers are alike. Let's see. Eternal luck. It really talks about understanding chance. I think chance, indeterminacy, is a big role in this book. And that's a very interesting thing to learn about. If you're not familiar with how the stock market works, or gambling or anything like that, this is a very, very useful book to introduce you to these topics. And if you wanted to learn more about these topics, this is a good way to at least have you introduced to the many subtopics that are found in this book. And it's done in a very nice, it has a very good narrative, and it's very easy to read as you're taken through these, I would say very complex topics, I guess you could say, because when I read this, I wasn't familiar with a lot of the figures. I was being introduced the first time to Claude Shannon as a historic figure, you could say. And it was very, very valuable. Because it's talking about beating the stock market. People... from the last century, I guess. Now, saying the last century is sort of a weird thing to say, but I guess it's true now. The people of the last century devoted so much time to try and understand the stock market and try to beat it. And a lot of technology was created surrounding that. Information technology too. And this covers a lot of that. So it was very, very valuable, I found, really as a learning tool. And there's a lot of life lessons that you can take from it as well, I guess, that can be applied to today, because today technology is, we have so much of it. And I think there's a lot of concepts in Fortune's formula that would act as historic possibilities for someone who is engaging in technology in the way we are now, because as I said, history repeats. It's very likely that some of this text is already repeating in some ways. I'm not an expert by any stretch with a lot of the material, but I can venture a guess, because I do know a little bit about guessing, making an informed guess, which is kind of part of this book, you could say. An informed guess would be a lot of what is in this book is probably coming back in some way, and I think it would be a valuable read if you haven't, because it may give you an edge, and who doesn't want an edge these days? Am I right? Okay, so the next book is The Empire of Wealth by John Steele Gordon, The Epic History of American Economic Power. So, like I was saying, that these books are centered around North America. Specifically, this is about America. A lot of the important business figures are American. They come out of America. So that's where the history of this book lies. And that's an important thing to know. If you're not American, if you're from another country, it's valuable to learn about some American history in this, and how a lot of the strong business entities came to exist, because some of that is covered in this. And it's very interesting because really what sort of comes out of this book is almost business models and how to run a business. But you're looking at it through the lens of history too, so you do have to. It's not explicit. You have to translate the information. But for me, I'm used to reading history. I like reading history books. So, just kind of tapping into my school experience. I was already reading a lot of history books and music, and trying to decode what was historic about music. And so, I guess for me, when I was reading this, I almost was tapping into my music experience and trying to decode. What these old, well, I guess, yeah, because it's going to talk about a lot of older times. Maybe I can find that for you right now. No, I guess, it's pre-World War, early 1900s. So, for music, we'll just kind of make a quick detour. As musicians, it's very important to know music history so that you can look back what was done, and sort of draw out unique things, innovations that you can use today in new music. And that's how good quality music is usually crafted. You take things of the past and you kind of reassemble them in new ways, and that's really how you get the best new music. And a lot of bands, usually the most important bands throughout history, that's usually how they go about it. They're very smart and clever in terms of understanding how their influences work and how they've tapped into history in some way. So I don't know. That's just an aside from how I treated this book. You don't have to treat it in the same way, of course. Read it and take whatever you need out of it. But that's how I came at this book, because I wasn't experienced in learning about economics or American business or business in general. I was kind of trapped in a music bubble, and I was only really reading kind of history bits on music with music textbooks. So that's how I came at this book, and I got a lot of value out of it that way. So I guess leave it at that. So let me just have a quick peruse through the table of contents to see if I can... So it's going back into the Civil War era of the United States of America. So that kind of gives you a time frame. So it's talking about the growth of businesses and the iconic figures from at least the 1800s. Let's see if I can... 1700s, okay. And see, this is kind of funny. This is what I would do actually with somebody in person if I didn't know. It's like, I really want to tell you. I don't want to be incorrect. I want to... So yeah, it's going to take you... It's going to start you off in about the 1700s. It talks about sort of the birth of America, really, too. Or the late 1600s, I guess. So... It's very historic, and that's why this book, I think, works so well with it, is because you're covering these very long ago time periods. You get to go back a little, fairly far in the history of the world, and grow from that into the 1800s, into the 1900s, covering the First World War. Because if we just... So let's talk about the World War for a second. It's a very powerful historic point in not American history, but world history. When there is a large-scale conflict, countries have to pool their resources in unique ways, and so a lot of the easy part of World War II, as an example, is getting out of the Great Depression. That's a historic point of time. I'm just gonna have some water. It puts people back to work in a way, because the country has to mobilize a lot of their resources. So when you deal with large-scale conflicts of the 20th century, World War I and World War II are very key points for all countries, and especially America too. And so this book gets into concepts from that. It probably talks about that fact alone, where the weird side effect of conflict is that economics change. So it's complex, because fighting is not good. It's not a good thing. But when it comes to economics, sometimes large scale conflict is maybe unavoidable to some degree. I don't know. I don't want to make too many statements that cross boundaries in some way, but it covers that in this, and I find it interesting because it gives you a chance to go back into history and learn from mistakes. Basically, the world doesn't want to have conflict. People don't want to fight each other. We're at a very connected time in human history. In fact, we've never been connected so much as of now. Nobody wants to fight each other. So something like this would be, I think, very valuable now and going into the future, to go back and relive these historic moments that tap into world events that influence economics regionally, which, in this case, it's the United States of America. And it talks about... I found a page here that gives you some names like J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie. These are names that kind of come up throughout the book as business figures, because they've been all large, very successful people in business. It talks about the stock market. I believe it gets into oil companies, and it gives you some history. So it's very interesting to understand the relationship of oil as a natural resource, and how powerful that was as an economic driving force for the whole world. And it's very interesting now, because all countries at this point are trying to get away from fossil fuels and non-sustainable resources, and put focus into renewable resources, solar energy, anything that is renewable to power ourselves. We're at a point in time where we very clearly understand that using a non-renewable resource is just it's not gonna cut it. It's not gonna work. But this gives you insight into how a whole economic what want to say system, but maybe that's not a good enough word for it. Almost like an entity, an economic entity was created on oil. And I thought that's interesting because, what if history repeats in the future and we stumble upon as a civilization a new resource that is finite? I don't know what that could be. I feel that renewable resources of all kinds, wind, solar, is the way to go because it gives. It's not straining the physical, the environment, like our the earth. Basically, we want to preserve the earth as much as we can because it's the only thing we got. It's our one place to call home. This is where people are born, and this is where we die, unless we get out of the planet and go to Mars or wherever. But that's too far in the future to even really talk about. But it makes for good science fiction. I'll tell you that, for a lot of other books. So let's just see where we're going. So this book is in chronological order. I feel as I'm flipping through it, I'm seeing dates pop out. It's ending up into the mid 20th century. It gets right up into the 90s, and it talks about the stock market. And it talks about let's see. It talks about September 11th, too, very, very briefly, actually, at the very, very end of the book. So that's kind of interesting. Let's just look at the date of publication. So this was done in 2004, and so let's see. So this book basically ends. Historically, so it's really ending in 2001, or at least that's when it's summing up a lot of the information. So it's really going to take you right up to the year 2000. So it's going to cover almost a whole century of business and ideas. Yeah, very incredible. It's great. It's good. It's a powerful thing to understand history from another country. When I think of America, I mean, it's almost part of the same land that Canada existing. I'm in Canada, and the United States is just down south. It feels like we're on the same piece of land, really. So, American history almost is in tandem with Canadian history in a lot of way, and I feel and I think there is a lot of mention of maybe Canadian historic situations in this, but I can't be 100% certain. It is mostly American, but yeah, extremely valuable. Reading something like this gives you such an interesting perspective. And if I hadn't read this book, a lot of the business books that I read from the 2017-2018 reading list wouldn't make. I wouldn't have the context of this to drive my knowledge in certain directions. So this is good. These three books, it would be a powerful little trio to give you a good historic understanding of North America, I guess you say, and business. Because business is kind of global. Methods of business is not. It can be regional, but people do business everywhere, so that's I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't really have to be region locked, I guess. So the next two books, this is cool. They're both red. I don't. I like colors. So these are the next two books. So which one did I read first? I think I read The Joy of Freedom and an Economist's Odyssey by David R. Henderson. So these books are kind of more. The first three are more like a narrative telling a story of history. These are more kind of concepts, maybe more theoretical, I guess you could say. Just talking about certain ideas that are disconnected into chapters. Maybe these two books are a little bit more difficult to read for that reason, I guess, because when you have a flowing narrative, it's easy to read. Just like you'd be reading a story, but these are more maybe more difficult. Not hard to read by any stretch, but a different flow of reading if you were to transition from those three to this. It'd be kind of jarring. But once you start reading it, you'll get right into it. And I forgot. I think this is autographed by the author. I think that says David R. Henderson. To somebody, I don't want to say the name, but it says "For Freedom, Best, David R. Henderson." I didn't realize that. See, this is cool. Like we wouldn't have captured this otherwise. Yeah, that's really cool. I don't know how I got this because I ordered this off Amazon. So I think this was a used book, maybe. I feel like it was a used book. Because sometimes you have to just get a used version of it. You don't have an option to get a fresh print. But wow, that's kind of cool. So I think that says David. It's weird to read people's handwriting, David. Yeah, that's the author. So the author signed this book, and I guess I have somebody else's signed copy. So thank you for that. I guess this book now has a lot more value to me now, I guess. Woo! All right, well let's talk about it. So again, it's been a while. I've already told you this in a preface a little way back now that I haven't read these books for a while, and I'm going to go through them with you as I would off the cuff talk about it. So it basically talks about, like I said, economic concepts, the joy of freedom, hooked on economics, your right to property. So it talks about owning land, freedom of association, free markets, how capitalism works. That's very interesting. Capitalism is something that not a lot of people realize what it is. At least I didn't really know what it was until I started to read these books. Because you hear the words like capitalism, communism, all these isms, these political isms, but until you really start to understand what it is, you're at the whim of society and what their sound bites are and what it means. And so this talks about the joy of capitalism as a free market. And really what I kind of got out of that is the sense of competition. Supply and demand. You can't really do business if things are preset and given to you, I guess you could say. Because I don't know too much about communism either. I don't know politics very clearly, but I'm just kind of tapping into what I pulled out of this. Free markets, the freedom to buy, sell, and trade whatever you can. I don't know if it talks about how products get copied or how but I think innovation plays into that, because that's kind of a core concept of capitalism, is how to innovate and do better than your competitor, basically. So competitor analysis, and I think that's kind of important to understand too, because we're in a world, even back to my first video, the bloody water of drop shipping. You've got a lot of people doing that same business model. So in terms of capitalism, what could you say about that? I don't know personally, but it would start to make you think about what people are doing now for business once you start to understand these core ideas. There's some interesting. I was actually just reading some of the titles throughout the book. So there is going to be a lot of politics in here. It talks about South Africa, Nazi Germany, as historic examples of politics influencing the economics of a region. Because I think maybe you know, but Germany had a very tough time after the First World War, and there was a lot of economic challenges until the politics changed and kind of revived Germany in a way. So this covers that, and it's very valuable to go back and relive those moments through an author's interpretation. Let me see if there's anything else of notable values. It talks about some racial concepts, and that's important too, because the author is connecting racial discrimination into economics, because that's something that's interesting too. Is when you talk about racism, there's it's not just about human rights. There's more connected to it. These like racism as just like I guess we could say a human challenge, a challenge of being human. There's more connected to it, and in this book, it's basically showing you how freedom reduces racial discrimination by making it expensive. So it's connecting economic concepts into the concept of racism. So that's also very valuable to go back and look at. We've come a long way as a human civilization when it comes to racism and being compassionate to others and understanding. Having understanding come first before anything is important. So, it's always good to go back and relive those things, and it sort of puts you into perspective to make you feel that we have come a long way with how we treat other people, and it kind of give yourself the whole world can pat itself on the back, I guess. Not anyone in particular, but our whole civilization. We've come so far already, and a book like this kind of makes you think, because it's putting you back into the 20th century, so it's going back in time, and it's showing sort of progression. So, how cool is that? It's very. I think it's very valuable to know these things. Let me see. It talks about taxes, Social Security. The stock markets, injustice of Social Security, so it gets into that. This is quite a powerful book. Now that I'm reliving it with you in person, we've just within these few minutes we've covered a whole range of very powerful, deep, complex topics that you could spend an entire. You could probably get a degree on some of these topics. There's. A lot of this you can study in university. So, this book is it's quite powerful. And I think that's mainly all we can really get to, because I've flipped through most of it as I've been talking with you. And so there it is. So this is more, I would treat this book as more like a theory book. You've got the first 3 books as more kind of story narratives, telling you a story of historic business people, business models, business ideas, innovations. This is kind of like giving you the theory behind it. Maybe even a little bit of psychology is to explain why people would do the things they do for economic reasons. Economics as a theme in this book. It kind of breaks down why people would do the things that they do. There's economic reasons, and I think it a lot of that gets uncovered in this book. And what a valuable book it is by the looks of it, as I've now relived it with you. And the author signed it. That's kind of cool, right? Very interesting. Okay, so The Success Equation is the next book. I don't know if you'll be able to see this as it actually is, because I don't know how the camera does it, if it reverses it. Anyway, sorry. The Success Equation: Untangling Skill and Luck in Business, Sports, and Investing. Michael J. Mauboussin. Hope I pronounced that correctly. So again, it's more talking about detached concepts within the realm of success and economics. Not the narrative maybe is a little bit stronger in this book, but still you're dealing with different types of ideas. So let's look at the publication first. So 2012. Okay, so this is still pretty recent. It's written in the 21st century, so it was only 8 years ago now. Yeah. Okay. So it's talking about what sources of success, talking about the luck skill continuum. That was very interesting, actually. Now, yeah, things are just coming back into my memory right now as I get into this. So the luck skill continuum. So there's a continuum of luck versus skill. I remember reading that where that was kind of a new thing for me. I was like, whoa, okay, this is cool. I think it talks about sports in a way. Baseball gets mentioned, I think. Yes, yeah, Major League Baseball. Baseball is very statistic driven when it comes to understanding the game. Like hitting averages and stuff. And I guess you could connect that to the movie and the book Moneyball, where the Oakland A's team was put together based on statistics, and as a result, they sort of changed how baseball was structured and teams put together. So it kind of touches on that, because that's a luck skills sort of situation, right? There's elements of both, and it talks about that. So that's a very valuable and interesting thing to understand. So skill equals observed outcome minus luck. That's very interesting. I don't want to give too much away. Well, I guess I'm giving stuff away now that I've already talked about these books, so whatever. I don't care. I know I said I didn't want to get too deep in the books, but I guess I can't help myself because I'm reliving the books now with you and whatever. That's the beauty of why we're doing it this way, is I get to maybe contradict myself potentially too. So the end of the luck skill is, yeah, this is interesting. It even shows you with sports icons what is skill. So say chess is pure skill, and then you've got like pure luck, which is casino stuff, and then each sport is kind of in between. Like baseball is more skill. Actually, basketball has more to do with skill than baseball by the looks of it. Baseball has more luck elements, but they're still closer to the skill spectrum when it comes to that. So that's kind of cool. Let's see if there's anything else of interest. There's a lot of graphs in here too, so that's something notable. This is an interesting concept, having pictures take up space in a book. So really, when you look at some books, they're not as long as you think they are because there's pictures in them, and it takes up space. So this book actually, well, let's get into that, right? So this book is only minus. You have to consider that the notes and bibliography and all that index doesn't, like, that's not part of the story or the main book. So this book is only 200. No, sorry, that's the appendix. Actually, this is cool. This has equations, mathematical equations in here in the appendix, and that's actually really cool. So this is only 232 pages, and a good portion of the book has pictures. So it's actually not that big of a read. You could probably finish this book fairly quickly if you were to read it. And it talks about building skill, understanding what skill is, some psychology involved in that. And this I think sort of plays off of concepts into the Fortunes Formula book, actually. So this book connects more into that than the others, I feel. I'm just gonna have some water. And no, the author didn't sign this one. I realized that nobody signed it. So I think this is maybe a new book. I'm not sure. talks about reversion to the mean, which is sort of a statistics. So it goes into statistics a lot as well. So if you like statistics and you have an interest in that, and you haven't got this book, this would be a good one. Yeah, I think that's all there is to it. I think the big thing for me was just understanding the concept of skill and luck, and how that there is a continuum, and that's how you can look at things. And so when you make business decisions now, I guess if we were to connect that to today, it'd be very valuable for you to understand what is luck and what is skill. You know, if you're to make a business decision, what element of that is just pure luck, and what is that basically just your skill in being able to execute a certain thing and make it happen. And so how would you know that before you got into it? So without knowing that there is a relationship, you'd have an advantage in your decision making as a business, or even just in personal life. I get maybe we don't need to talk about people as a business, but I find that everyone now tends to have some sort of side hustle business. I'm doing these blogs as a way to put in roots into a future blog that could potentially monetize. So I am sort of treating it like a business in a way. So maybe it's that. Maybe the people of today going into the future, we're all going to be business owners, maybe in some degree. Because if we talk about automation and a lot of the technological advances, we're probably going to be doing a lot of freelance work in the future, where we get to be our own boss. Jobs are going to change significantly, at least in my lifetime, I feel, and then the next generations of people will have a whole different world to live in, basically. And so, I don't know. I think these are very cool things to know. Just in general, I find, because like I said, it seems that everyone kind of has some sort of side hustle as an adult, really to make money, to sort of break out of their economic cast, if you will. So that's pretty cool. So those are two good books, and the last two books are, I'm sort of trying to do a lead up, making you want to know what these books are. Oh, there it is. I don't know too much about politics, but the next two books are political, I guess you could say. They're two biographies of two important figures of the 1980s. You've got Mikhail Gorbachev. This is Perestroika, updated to include Mikhail Gorbachev's June 1988 speech to the party conference. New Thinking for Our Country and the World. And the next book is When Character Was King, a story of Ronald Reagan by Peggy Noonan. I believe the author of this is Mikhail Gorbachev. I've got to double check. Yeah, it is. Sorry, he wrote this book. And Peggy Noonan. I guess this is just a biography written by Ronald Reagan. So, how interesting is that? The two books, two important political figures, the USSR, Russia, I guess at the time, and the United States of America, two big players in the Cold War during a period of economic progression, because a lot of these books make reference to the Cold War as well too, and the economic changes of the 80s. And so these two books, I would read at the very end to almost as an icing on the cake, so that you know the political leaders of that time and how they acted, and I guess the reasons behind certain political moves, because it's very easy to criticize the current leadership when sometimes the political leaders have to just make certain decisions, and that's just the way it is, and how they are perceived currently may not be how they're perceived in the future. Because when you look back in history, you have a different perception of a lot of political choices. I guess that's sort of like almost a caveat to understanding politics, because I don't know too much about politics, but I know enough to understand that they're complex, and that it's not always clear what's good or bad at the time, and sometimes certain political choices just have to be made, and that's just the way it is. So I don't want to get too much into that, because I'll get in trouble, I guess, because I don't know truly what I'm talking about. I know what I know from these books and personal experience, and having lived into my mid-30s, I guess. But so that, I guess that's the value of reading biographies of political leaders, is to understand a little bit more about the personalities behind these politicians. So I guess we'll start with Ronald Reagan. What an interesting book this was, because I guess having an actor transition into politics was a very unique thing at the time. Well, if you remember the Back to the Future movie, remember when Marty McFly says to Doc, "Ronald Reagan's the president," and he goes, "Huh, the actor? What?" Like that was kind of is sort of captured in this book in an interesting way. It sort of makes reference to the fact that that he was an actor. But what is interesting about Ronald Reagan as a president, that acting was his introduction into politics, and how secretly, or sort of how uncanny that how valuable it was for him as a president to be an actor first and then a politician second, because a lot of what we know in politics is how we visually perceive the politician. So being an actor and being skilled in public speaking and portraying a certain character, there's a certain value to that you can look at, I guess, in the context of history now, because he was the 80s. He was the 80s president, basically. But another cool thing that it talks about politics in that Ronald Reagan was a part of the oh shoot, I don't know the name of it. Maybe I can flip through. But he was basically on like a board, like a committee, like the Actors Guild, I think it was, and so that's how he got into politics, was through that, and then he became well known as a political leader through the acting societies. Because there was like a Red Scare, if someone maybe older than me who lived through that time period remembers, where there was figureheads, Hollywood. It was sort of if you had a communist agenda, it wasn't a good thing. It was kind of scary back in that time. And so he kind of worked through that time period and came out as a political figurehead to combat communism, in that way. And that's, I guess, where he got into presidency. That's sort of, I guess, the short version. I hope that's all correct, but that's what I remember from this book, actually, is that his politics were centered around acting and art, basically. And that's kind of interesting. So I'm not sure if there's been any other politician that sort of had that path where it was sort of like a fine art. Acting is, to me, that's art. It's a fine art. At least that's what my fine art program taught me. Dance, visual, film, music, it's all fine art. So you see, he was a fine arts kind of character before presidency. It's not like he went to school and did particular training. And basically, this book is really just going to cover his history of his political leadership and a lot of his biography. And so it's really nice to know who Ronald Reagan really was, because I find historic figures get changed in the continuous rhetoric of people, I guess. People changed in that context, I guess. But you sort of have to go back to original sources and look at who was this person as a president. What did they accomplish? Who were they? What were they actually like? It was really interesting to learn about Ronald Reagan. I think he got shot in the early years of his presidency, and he just kind of like toughed it out, and like That's awesome. So you sort of get you get compassionate about someone like Ronald Reagan. You get to really learn about his personal history. It's extremely valuable. Learning about for me, because I'm Canadian. I would probably benefit learning Canadian politics, but learning politics from another country is still super important, because the political leaders of the '80s were basically Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev. Like, they were very strong figureheads, and this book actually mentions a lot of Mikhail Gorbachev's work, and how there was a lot of talk in terms of the arms race in that time, and that was very interesting. The '80s were, we're now sort of almost trying to relive the '80s in a way when it comes to, I guess, aesthetic. There's almost a revival happening. So it's valuable to go back and understand the climate of the '80s and what it actually really meant. It was a very interesting time. Not only because that was kind of the climax of maybe the Cold War, like the Rocky Four, right? That was like almost like I don't know, some sort of love letter to the Cold War, or maybe it was a political statement. I don't know, but if that movie, if you remember it, you had the Russia versus America, right? So pretty heavy stuff. When you look back on it, and this book was a very different read compared to this. This is more telling a story, because it was written by Peggy Noonan. This was written by Mikhail Gorbachev, so it felt more like like almost a manifesto of how things are changing in now Russia than the USSR, and the how the USSR was basically dissolving and changing. And politics were evolving and changing at that time. So this is very cool, because it talks about nuclear disarmament, the German states, the European opportunities, regional conflicts, the role of women in families. Like, it covers like a wide range of topics. His inspiration to launch perestroika, which is the Russian word for openness, I believe. That is covered in here. I should know this before we're talking about it. But hey, like I said, this is the best part of just doing it off the cuff. Because if you were here with me right now, I'd have to sort of stumble through this anyways, and kind of look at the books and say, okay, well, what does perestroika mean? It talks about Lenin here as well. Yeah, what a cool book this is too, because you now have both sides. You've got both sides to the story here in the '80s, and it's valuable to understand more than one point of view when you try to put together your own personal narrative. It's a disadvantage to only have one point of view. It's a good, positive thing to have everyone's story be told, and then you can take all of that and put it together and get a better understanding. So this is more of for me it was it was very dry, but after a while you kind of get into how the book is written, because it sort of reads like this is what we're doing, kind of style of talk. But it's very inspiring, actually. It really makes you think about the history of Russia, and how much that part of the world had to go through and change. And compassion, you can pull a lot of compassion out of that too, because say the movie Rocky sort of has to villainize the USSR, but that's not the point. We're all people. We're all living on the same earth, so really compassion is the driving force to caring about one another in the long run, because like I said, it's the same. We're on the same planet. We're people of the earth now, I guess, or earthlings. we haven't really gotten to aliens yet, or there's no aliens out there. But anyways, that's how I felt about this book. I felt a very deep insight into the history of the USSR, and I guess maybe understanding more what communism meant and how it affected people. So, what an interesting thematic line we have created through these books. I'll kind of gather them all here for you because I'm looking at the yellow symbol where it says you're running out of time. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books to read. I guess I'll just hold them like this so we can last the last 5 minutes. Not too heavy. But this is quite to me it feels like a very powerful reading list, and when I look back on it, I'm thinking, wow, what did you give me? Like, you gave me I'm speaking to the I guess the person who gave me the reading list, but maybe it's funny for you, but yeah, like, oh my god, what did you give me? Like, holy smokes, I was given like almost a powerful slice of history and maybe secrets or you know, something like that, because I never was really interested in economics or politics, because really the flavor of these books is a lot of economics, some in politics, economic theories, you know, the history of business, I guess, and it all just kind of puts me back to how history is repeating, and if you don't know, you know, we're bound to repeat the same mistakes. So I guess maybe that's another reason to be well read, is to be self-aware of how the world changes, and so that, you know, you can stand up and go, hey, you know, that happened already in the past. Maybe we should not do exactly that. You know, it can allow you to have more of a voice, a positive voice, you know, not just a naggy sort of a curmudgeon, I guess you could say, because I don't want to, when I get old, I don't want to be a curmudgeon and be like, everything's bad. I'm sort of just trying to be funny now, sorry. But yeah, I see now the power of being, you know, informed through books and having the right books connect together. And I guess when I look at the books, having done this with you, it's like all these books connect in a very nice way. And ending off with the 2 political books was probably the best way to do it, because it's almost like the icing of the cake and giving you the perspective of the rest of how these books work, because you've got, you know, almost theories and concepts built in here in the middle. You've got a nice narrative stories to start off with, and so yeah, this, you know, I think these 8 books would wait, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7. Did I say 8? Oh my goodness. These books would be really good. So yeah, you should try and do the order like I've suggested if you can. I kind of did it out of order, but I can see now, having read them, that there is themes that sort of translate the best through these books. So look at that. I didn't wear my red shirt for, maybe I did wear it for a reason. Who knows? All right. Well, there you go. Thanks for watching this. I guess we went the distance on this one, so thank you for sticking around, and I appreciate your viewership. And I'll see you in the next one too. I'll try and have something good for you in the next video. So, all right. Well, thanks. Bye.